Picture this for a second. You're sitting by the window of a super fast train, right? Trees, houses, fields, they're all just blurring past you. Well, this is exactly what a young guy named Tushar was doing, heading from Delhi to Chennai for a wedding. But then his uncle taps him on the shoulder and drops this little knowledge bomb. People have literally only been traveling by train for about 150 years. I mean, buses came even later than that. And this just completely blew Tushar's mind. It brings up a really fascinating question, you know? When people didn't have fast transport, did they just stay put in one single place for their whole lives? How did our ancient ancestors survive? How did they move around? And how did they eventually build this crazy modern world we see whizzing by outside our windows? Well, today, we are going to dive into the incredible source material that gives us the answers to those exact questions.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely pumped to guide you through this today. We're going to unpack one of the most monumental, game-changing shifts in the entire history of our planet. We're talking about humanity's epic journey from a life of constant nomadic wandering all the way to the settled agricultural lifestyles that actually shaped the modern world we live in right now. It is just a wild story of survival, deep observation, and honestly, a lot of accidental genius.
All right, so here is our game plan for today. First, we'll look at the nomadic hunter-gatherers. Second, stone tools and fire. Third, we cover the Great Climate Shift. Fourth, the domestication revolution. And finally, number 5, a new settled lifestyle. Let's get right into it. Starting us off, part 1, the nomadic hunter-gatherers. Okay, so we have to rewind the clock way, way back. We're talking about 2 million years ago on the subcontinent. The folks living back then are known by a pretty specific title, based on exactly how they got their food: hunter-gatherers. But here's the thing, our ancient ancestors weren't just wandering around aimlessly. According to our source material, their movement was a highly calculated science of survival, basically driven by 4 core reasons. First up, if they stayed in one place for too long, they would literally eat themselves out of house and home, just completely depleting all the local plants and animals. Second, the hunters obviously had to follow the migration of their prey, like deer and wild cattle. Wherever those animals went, the humans had to go too. Third, trees and plants bear fruit in different seasons, right? So people had to constantly move to different areas just to find what was actually edible at that time of year. And fourth, this is the ultimate deal breaker: water. While some rivers flow all year, a lot of them dry up. So to survive those brutal dry seasons, humans had to track down reliable water sources. So yeah, moving wasn't just wanderlust. It was a strict, non-negotiable survival mechanism. Moving right along to part 2, stone tools and fire.
Now, just moving around wasn't enough to survive in a totally wild, unforgiving world. Humans needed tech. And what's really interesting here is the sheer versatility of these early tools. These rough, chipped stones you're seeing, they were basically the ultimate prehistoric multi-tools. On the left, you can see how they use stone to punch holes and stitch animal hides together to make warm clothing. On the right, they're using them to dig up edible roots from the hard earth. I mean, they also use these things to scrape bark off trees, chop fruit, and even attach them to sticks to make early spears and arrows for hunting. It's incredibly resourceful.
Think about this for a second. What do we use fire for today? Maybe a cozy fireplace in the winter, sitting around a campfire, or just turning on a gas stove. Well, for early humans, figuring out how to master fire was literally the difference between life and death. In places like the Kernel Caves, archaeologists have found these ancient traces of ash, and this proves they were using fire for 3 absolutely crucial things. First, as a light source in pitch-black caves. Second, to roast meat, which actually made it safer and way easier to digest. And third, to scare away all those deadly, dangerous predators lurking in the dark. So to really grasp this, we have to understand the massive scale of time we are talking about here. Take a look at this timeline. The Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age, stretches from 2 million years ago all the way to just 12,000 years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. Almost 99% of all human history happened right there in that one single era. Insane, right? Then we hit the Mesolithic period, where the environment started changing and tools got smaller and a bit more refined. They call those microliths. And finally, around 10,000 years ago, we enter the Neolithic, or New Stone Age, which is where literally everything changes forever. Which brings us perfectly to part 3, the Great Climate Shift. This shift is honestly the ultimate plot twist in human history. Around 12,000 years ago, the planet went through this massive environmental change, and the world just started getting warmer. This prehistoric global warming led to the sudden widespread birth of vast grasslands. And think about it. When you have way more grass, what happens next? You get a massive population boom in grass-eating animals. Deer, sheep, goats, wild cattle, they just began to multiply rapidly all across the landscape. And, as a bonus, the warming climate thawed out lakes and rivers, making fishing a super crucial and abundant new food source.
So, naturally, humans followed these flourishing herds, right? Because, well, they were a super reliable food source. But as they followed them around, something kind of magical happened. Without even meaning to, humans became students of animal behavior. By constantly watching these herds day in and day out, early humans started figuring out their eating habits, their movement patterns, and even their breeding cycles. And they eventually had this light bulb moment. Hey, maybe we don't just have to hunt them. Maybe we can guide them. And that thought right there sparked the very first ideas of herding.
And that kicks off Part 4, the Domestication Revolution. This is the exact moment humanity stops just taking whatever nature hands them and starts actively shaping the world. We really need to define this concept clearly. Domestication isn't just, taming a wild animal. It is a deliberate, biological process. Humans started noticing that certain wild grasses like wheat and barley were producing edible grains, so they started collecting the seeds, figured out when they ripened, and eventually began planting them on purpose. At the exact same time, they started actively looking after specific animals. By choosing which plants to grow and which animals to breed, humans actually began to fundamentally change these species from their wild ancestors. Now, according to our source material, the wild ancestor of the dog was the very first animal humans tamed. But why dogs? Well, imagine early humans leaving little scraps of food near their camps. Naturally, the boldest, least aggressive wild canines would creep closer to get a free meal. Over generations, this mutual trust formed. The humans provided food, and in return, these early dogs provided protection and even helped out with the hunting. Once that worked, humans started encouraging gentle herd animals like sheep, goats, and cattle to hang around their camps by protecting them from other wild predators. And the crazy thing is, we have physical proof of this process. Just look at this comparison. Notice the massive, super aggressive teeth of the wild pig on the right and compare that to the much smaller teeth of the domesticated pig on the left. Because ancient humans deliberately chose to breed the gentler, less aggressive animals over thousands of years, the physical traits of these animals actually changed. Their teeth and horns literally grew smaller. They reshaped the animal's genetics just by consistently picking the friendliest ones. So, ancient humans essentially became the world's first geneticists without even realizing it. Check out their selection criteria here. For animals, like we said, they picked the non-aggressive ones. But for plants, they were just as picky. They specifically selected seeds from plants that weren't easily diseased. They hunted for plants that yielded really large, plump grains. And crucially, they needed plants with strong, sturdy stalks that wouldn't just snap under the weight of those heavy, ripe grains. They deliberately saved those specific seeds to lock in those exact traits for the next harvest. Honestly, the food sitting on your dinner plate today is the direct result of those exact ancient choices. Finally, we arrive at Part 5, a new settled lifestyle. All of this brilliant observation and selective breeding did something massive. It permanently grounded humanity. Because agriculture isn't just a quick weekend project, it's a huge commitment. Think about the steps involved here. You have to sow the seeds, spend weeks or even months watering them, pulling out weeds, constantly guarding your fields from hungry birds and animals, and then you just have to patiently wait for the harvest. Because plants take a really long time to grow, sometimes months or across entire seasons, humans were basically forced to abandon their nomadic ways. If you want to farm, you absolutely must stay in one place. Now, successfully harvesting a field of wheat or barley created a brand new, amazing situation, a massive surplus of food. And grain is awesome because it's incredibly versatile. It was eaten as daily food, carefully kept as seed for the next planting season, and stored up for the future so they could survive harsh winters. But of course, this surplus created a completely new problem. How on earth do you safely store all this extra grain? Well, necessity is the mother of invention. People began crafting these large clay pots, weaving massive baskets, and digging really sophisticated storage pits right into the ground to protect their precious harvest. And hey, it wasn't just plants that were being stored either. Our source material points out this genuinely brilliant concept. Animals are walking food stores. Just think about the sheer genius of that for a second. Unlike a pile of grain, which is kind of fragile and can easily rot or get eaten by rats, a herd of domesticated animals is essentially a living, breathing pantry. They naturally multiply, giving you even more food. They provide a continuous, renewable supply of nutritious milk. And, whenever needed, they offer a reliable source of meat. Herding was basically the ultimate food storage life hack of the ancient world. Which brings us to our final thought for today. I really want you to consider this. How did the simple act of storing surplus food in a clay pot pave the way for the modern civilization we live in today? It's wild to think about. By settling down to protect their crops and store their food, humans built the very first permanent villages. And those villages eventually grew into towns. Those towns exploded into massive cities. And that ultimately led to the fast-paced, high-speed train networks that our friend Tushar was marveling at in the very beginning. That 12,000-year-old shift from hunting to storing literally changed our destiny forever. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through time on today's Explainer. I really hope you look at the world outside your window just a little bit differently today. Keep wondering, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.